That's my secret, Cat. I'm always angry.
Hello everyone! Welcome back to the Untitled Marvel Project. I'm your host, Tanner Dykstra, joined as always by my good friends, Tucker Hazel and Abram Buhner. We are on a journey to rank and review every single MCU film, the first time it's ever been done, by the way.
Oh yeah.
And this week, we are capping off Phase 1 with our talk on the Avengers. Yeah. We're talking.
God, yeah.
We're copping off and capping off Phase 1. If you want more smooth, fantastic, just silky intros like that, you should subscribe to Backlog Banter. You should like this video. You should join our Discord channel. You know the drill. Folks, it's the Avengers talk time, okay? I'm so excited. I haven't seen this movie.
Take your fucking clocks and watches, everyone. It's the
It's
Avengers
that
talk time.
It's Avengers talk time. I'm going to stop this intro and throw it over to one of you to save me.
I'll go first.
Thank you.
I'll follow up that beautiful intro and that beautiful deep backlog banter reference to a year ago by going even further into the past, all the way back to 2012 to The Avengers, which is a film I have not seen in a very, very long time. And upon rewatching it, I had a good time. I think this is a fun movie, but I think this is, for me, this is the first MCU movie. This is a great thought. I put it in the Discord. I should have saved it for here. This is the first MCU movie in my mind.
Actually, that's Iron Man.
Straight face.
This is
what?
The film. This is the film where I feel like the always applicable positives and negatives of effectively every MCU film begin. This is where I think the formula is catalyzed. Excellent banter, great character moments, pretty fun action sequences, but what's around it, we'll get into. I found Avengers to be critically flawed in a couple ways. I think it has some pacing issues. I think Loki gets reduced to just another like tyrannical, I want to rule a planet type villain.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the films come after it, unlike the ones that come before this, Avengers tries its damnedest to stay out of the way of any of its thematic material, only referencing it in the most mild sense. So a lot of the interesting discussion, save for effectively a sizzle reel at the end of the film about how do people respond to the Avengers? What's the role of the Avengers? It's basically pigeonholed for what is a fun, but maybe sort of hollow, big blockbuster action film. And to that point, I think it's pretty good. I've got some fundamental issues with it that I want to discuss, but I did have fun revisiting this movie.
Tucker.
All right, boys, It's time. This is one of the moments that I've waited for my entire life. Is a chance for me to really unpack why I believe that The Avengers 2012 is the modern equivalent of Jaws, of Star Wars, of Indiana Jones. This is the pinnacle of modern blockbuster filmmaking for a lot of reasons. And because of that, I think this is one of the most perfect movies I've ever seen in my life. This is, and I'm showing my hand here, this is a clear 10 out of 10 for me. Any of those flaws that you can pull out a little bit of thread, it's like, and you pull out the thread, it's like, oh, this is 1.5 centimeters. This barely even counts in the grand scheme of the sweater that is the Marvel Studios' The Avengers, which I think is just phenomenal from basically every possible category you can throw at it.
I would have to err on the side of Tuckerisms with this one because
Whoa.
I do agree more with Tucker. I think that there's some points that Abram has made so far, and I assume I'll agree with you to some extent in your criticisms. But yeah, I was lower on this going into it than I was coming out of it. I enjoyed this more on my third time watching this movie. I think, yeah, Tucker brings up a great point with the fact that this is like, for better or worse, this is like the pinnacle of modern blockbusters. The script is so tight. I think this film, Tucker and I were talking about like the look of this film, the CGI. It's glossy, but I think it just adds to the aesthetic of this movie and like how you remember it looking. And all the characters and the actors are just firing on all cylinders in this. It's a home run. I will say that. It's a home run of a film.
Yeah, it's just the confidence that this movie exudes in all of its aspects that really draws me to it. I mean, you look at how rocky some of the other ones are leading up to this. You don't quite know which tone that they're going to lean in. Are they going to go a little bit darker with Thor or with Hulk? Are they going to go full on comedy with Iron Man. Like, there's a lot of different directions that it went before this, but Joss Whedon, his script, and the collaboration of all the actors under this one roof, clearly headed by Kevin Feige, feels so focused and confident that this movie just has its own feel that, of course, was copied and spun off with the rest of the MCU and the rest of the industry following suit. But where this started and it being, so old, quote unquote, this is one of the earlier MCU movies, but the fact that it holds up so well today, and you can see so many of the seeds that were planted for the greater MCU and the rest of the industry, it's just really impressive what they did and how well all of it paid off.
I think it's certainly a focused movie. That's why I think this is where the MCU really hits the stride that it's always on, right? Mm-hmm. I think that, and we'll discuss this as we get deeper in the MCU from my perspective, there is not much change from Avengers 1 to Avengers Endgame in terms of style, in terms of a lot of things. And I don't mean that inherently as a negative. I think what was established here was a formula that works because it's a formula that's fun. Now, in service of that, I think we lose some things that I want to talk about, but it is certainly a fun movie. And it is certainly a movie that gives its characters an opportunities to shine. And I think the movie is at its best when it does that. That's why I was interested to see in our Discord, one of our friends was saying that the helicarrier sequence for him was one of the weaker in the film, where it was started to drag a little bit. Because for me personally, I think that's when the movie really engaged me. Ultimately,
I agree.
Before that, I was somewhat bored. I think that it's too jumpy for me. I find some of the more bland shield people and shield things not that interesting. But when you get into that helicarrier and you're having these great dynamics between characters, and you start to see, okay, here's the thread we were following along into Civil War, or here's this thread that's going to take us this direction. That's when the film's at its best. And once I get to the helicarrier, I was having a much better time with the movie.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is clearly broken into three distinct areas, a three-act structure, believe it or not.
Has anyone noticed this before?
Someone should write a fucking book about that. Which is the character introductions, which is what I think you were saying is a little bit jumpy. But where you feel jumpy, I more feel is disparate in a way to sort of ease you into the collaboration. Is you're so used to these characters being in their own separate worlds, Thor being on Asgard, Cap being in the past, Tony in his own area, that they want to introduce these characters separately and with their own tones so that it doesn't feel out of place when they end up coming together. You get the establishment of Joss Whedon's dialogue, these actors in these more modernized roles preparing for this collaboration. You get each sequence to have them shine on their own before they come together. So you establish Black Widow in probably one of her best sequences in the entire MCU. You establish Cap feeling out of place in a thing that we got teased at the end of First Avenger, but didn't really get. And then, you get reestablished to Tony's cockiness and that he's working on clean energy, and Thor and Loki having their argument in the woods. All of that is sort of introductions, ease you in, jump around a little bit, but I think through consistently engaging sequences that are able to show off these personalities and reintroduce them in a way that makes it really satisfying when they come together. Because you're like, okay, I do know how Cap is feeling now that we've seen him at the beginning of this movie. I do know what position Bruce is in, because, of course, as a new actor, you have to be slowly introduced to him. And it builds those connections slowly, so it feels really satisfying when you get to that middle section and you know exactly where each person has come from and how they're coming together.
Now we can talk all the live long day till the cows come home about how great the character interactions are, and I want to. But I think we should first address, off the bat, sort of what is a lower hum in this movie, and that is the story itself. The story of how the Avengers come together and Loki invades Earth, and, the Tesseract and all this sort of business, because I think that it's not often talked about, but it's also pretty good. This movie knows how to balance that sort of 80-20 of characters versus story, because it's not a super story driven thing. It's very character driven, but I think it's deliberately designed that way, and it absolutely works. So
it's supposed to be simplistic so that there is a reason to get these characters together, have the focus be on them, and have that just be a catalyst for character introductions, which are what end up fueling the entire movie and the MCU as a whole. It's an excuse to get you in the door. It's focused and comic booky because of that, and I think that's why it works. It knows where the importance of this movie lie, where the strengths of the movies lie, and it gets the story out of the way. And even if that means sacrificing Loki's character development, which I think is, hit or miss on the whole for the MCU. I think it feels like they knew where to put their chips. They're like, okay, well, if we're really going to focus on what this movie's best at, we should push it all to one side. And I do think that is surely in the movie's benefit.
Sure.
See, I think this is where we start to diverge, because I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think you can have a backgrounded narrative with a stronger inciting incident. Ultimately, you think of someone like Thanos. Sure, Thanos persisted through a lot of the Infinity Saga, but he just kind of shows up and he wants to kill half of people in Infinity War. That's his thing, right? But I think you can do a lot with a little. And ultimately, I think that wasn't really accomplished here, because Loki ends up showing up. There's the Tesseract. He wants to invade Earth. That's kind of his thing. Here comes the Chitauri army, which are basically faceless, which basically do nothing other than show up to attack New York. I just feel like it's thin for the sake of the characters, sure, but I don't, for me personally, that doesn't excuse a thin plot by its own merit, because I think that an interesting plot incites more interesting character interactions. And I think we get some of that when the plot begins to complicate, when we learn that Nick Fury is basically trying to set up, this Avengers initiative, and then that doesn't work. So he's working on this Mark II stuff, or Phase 2, I think what it's called, to have a nuclear deterrent. That stuff is interesting, but if that stuff ends up becoming underplayed because we're focused on what is a pretty wooden invasion of Earth plotline. And for me, it just kind of, yes, I get into it. Okay, it's character time, because ultimately it's not story time, because there really isn't much of it. And I just find that disappointing when you have such rich villains and such interesting concepts you can pull on for a team-up movie like this.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, if we want to get into specifics about it, I do think that Avengers Loki is a weird, sidestepping for Loki's whole character trajectory in the MCU. It's like, okay, he's conflicted, he's angry that he's, been adopted and lied to his entire life in Thor. And then he falls off a rainbow bridge and becomes a tyrannical, humans are meant to be ruled, there is no such thing as freedom is useless, and then he's back on that character track. It is a weird thing, and I think they probably only really did it to, get a recognizable face as the villain for this, because they could have made it, give us any, A to C tier Marvel villain to throw into that role. But it's nice that we do get Loki, and it gives us, some clever little fun callbacks in future MCU movies, like in Thor Ragnarok, when Thor's taking the selfie with that one girl, and then she slaps Loki across the face, which is, in hindsight, a weirdly underplayed way to react to someone who almost destroyed all of New York. It's just a slap in the face. But
yeah, I totally forgot about that, to be honest.
But that's besides the point, because I think that Loki does play. He serves the role of just a maniacal, hand-wringing villain, which isn't exactly what Loki is in the MCU, but it works for the film.
I think where it comes down to is mostly that Loki has left Thor. He didn't actually fall off the Bifrost. That was an illusion or something, because he's fine at the end of it. We see him in that post-credit scene doing his maniacal stuff, looking through the eyes of Selvig or whatever. And so that just shows the extent of his trickery, his power. And having been essentially exiled from Asgard, he's fallen into this role where he will take anything to get power, to get back at Thor and Odin. And that's the role that he falls into when he's given an easy access to a literal army and an Infinity Stone by Thanos and the other, I guess we'll get into a little bit, but I feel like it does sort of work for his character in this sort of moment of revenge rage that the Avengers acts as. He is acting in this way because he's come just hot off of Thor happening, and him finding out that he's a frost giant, being kicked out of Asgard, and all of this stuff, and Odin preferring Thor and everything. He acts irrationally, but I think also it gives his character a moment to shine in his manipulativeness, in his darker side, which we sort of back away from for the rest of the MCU. This is where he's at his most cunning, at his most vile. his lines and looks in his eyes and the grease in his hair, that's in my opinion the most iconic Loki. He really falls into this role, and while it is relatively simplistic as opposed to, I guess, the complexity that of course you get when you get to the Loki show, it works in a way that is comic booky in its style, and I think an intentional way. Loki was the first villain that the Avengers fought when they were together back in issue 1. Of course, that team was different, but the inciting incident being Loki, having it be comic booky, having it lean into this really focused tone, the story is subtle, but I think it works to supplement, as I said, what is best about this film. And unfortunately, that means taking a little bit away from Loki, though I do think there are strengths there that we weren't really getting into earlier.
Sure.
I do like parts of Loki for sure. And I think that one of the strongest scenes that he has is when he's talking with random Chitauri Captain number 7.
The other.
Yeah, the other. Now, the other is actually my second biggest part of this movie, because he is such a weird, like, M tangent of a character to just place into something. Why couldn't it have been like Corvus Glaive or MD Ma or something to make that pay off better in Infinity War? But yeah, it's just an unnecessary expository character that shows up for approximately 3 minutes total. And the fact that he's so tiny, it's barely an issue, but it's like, are you kidding me? Come on. This whole series is so interconnected. Why the fuck have this random 6-fingered guy?
No,
what the fuck does he have in his face? It's like
a muzzle.
Very weird, but I actually like him. I sure it could have been one of those other characters. Ultimately, they're all kind of interchangeable to me. They never really develop any kind of personality, so who really cares which random blue CGI man it is? But the reason I like that scene is because it makes Loki drop his guard for a second. I love him being like, I can't be intimidated, and then he gets like his fucking like mind melded for a second, and it cuts to him and he's like fucking sweating and he's
shaking.
He's clearly shaken. I think moments like that add a little bit to the character, right? And that services the storyline here. I think that one of my issues here, and I think we if we want to talk about any points of growth in the MCU as we mass this a little bit better later on, is that, in my opinion, a lot of the Avengers services the audience. And what I mean is things happen for the sake of two characters interacting so a cool moment occurs.
Yeah.
This is a movie of moments, and that's fine. It's just a different way to tell a story. But I feel like we get so caught up in, oh, it's really fucking badass when Hawkeye does basically anything in this movie. Or, oh, here comes Iron Man's going to hit the overpass and then fire his arc reactor beam at Cap's shield so he can spin it and hit the guy, or the iconic 360 panoramic shot. A lot of these moments are there to go, damn, that's cool. And ultimately, I think some of that takes away from the opportunity to develop a more interesting framework for these moments to happen in. And I just think that when we get moments like The Other, we get glimpses of that. We get glimpses of a motivation for Loki. We get glimpses of a greater plot unfolding, but that gets sidelined for, here's this bunch of shit coming out of the portal so that the Hulk can jump and hit the carrier, or we can have all these moments which are very fun, but they just feel perfunctory. And I just think that we've gotten better at hiding that over time.
My question about that would be to narrow down to the fact that I think that isn't necessarily true for the whole on this movie. I think that this movie, as compared to the rest of the MCU earlier on, especially, is one of the best in terms of making each action sequence and character interaction feel important as a combination of these characters that we know. Every action sequence leading up to that final battle, which is admittedly fan servicey, though I think there are smaller elements in there that are character development in the Hulk. Finally, Bruce and the Hulk sort of essentially teaming up to help people, Hulk saving people, Cap being in his leader role, Tony learning to sacrifice himself, Clint finally having a chance to get back at Loki. All those things are character moments, but before that, I think it's purely like character development that is fueling these moments that are cool shots and are the things, oh yeah, I'm so glad we finally saw Mjolnir hit Cap's shield, but that comes from a sequence that is established through character conflict, is through Thor and Tony being gaudy and headstrong, and Cap being the solidifying force in between them to stop it. These iconic moments that are cool, comic book frame shots are placed in the catalyst of character dynamic, of conflict, of personality, that I think is where this movie shines, and why I think, for the most part, these action sequences don't feel as superfluous as like, oh yeah, we have to have big CGI guy A fight big CGI guy D, like in Hulk, Incredible Hulk or something, because there are these motivations behind them, and in the progression of the story does feel very natural, and there isn't any moment where I'm like, well, why did this character make this choice? No, it feels very like a very simple progression of their character arcs. If this was to happen to them, this is the way that they would react, and it's like a whole bunch of ping pong balls bouncing off one another, but I think in a really satisfying way.
No, I definitely agree in part. I think again, it's a character movie, and then that's great. And I think it services the characters, it services the moment. But it's just when you put that in the framework of what I feel is a weak story, it doesn't feel as organic as it could have otherwise, because I find myself just questioning on a larger level. Okay, this is a really awesome moment where the relationship between Cap and Tony and Thor is growing, but it's growing in the context of what I just don't feel is a very organic setup. And it comes back at various points. It's okay, why does Loki just sit up on top of this hill and wait for them to fight for the entire time? Or how come Selvig, even though he's completely mind controlled and Hawkeye was just killing shield agents left and right, Selvig programmed like a little backdoor escape to shut down the portal, right? It feels contrived to me. And the contrivance for me stands at odds with the character stuff, which is obviously very good.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about the character stuff because, as I alluded to at the very beginning of this is an 80-20 character split, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Avengers themselves in the Avengers review.
Fine, begrudgingly so.
Yes. So I have to throw to you guys. Where would you like to start in terms of these characters, the character interactions? Who do you want to dive into first? Because there's lots of cool moments, and as that sort of interchange between you and Abram just went, Tucker, you said that these character moments are proxies for deeper character traits and interactions and relationship building. So who would like to start with maybe their favorite character or character interaction in the whole film?
Well, Tony is the best. I think as I'm rewatching these movies, there is such a gap of charisma between Tony and everybody else, and that's,
yeah,
and that is not a slight against everybody else. It is a praise to RDJ, who is just operating so far beyond, in my opinion, basically everybody else. I think Tom Hiddleston is probably second.
Yeah,
but in comparison to the rest of the Avengers cast, they feel flat to an extent, because there's just such a life that Tony brings to basically everything. I think he gets the humor in this movie lands most of the time. I think Tony gets the short end of the stick sometimes, like that Legolas joke and things like that. But on the whole, I think
clutch up Legolas.
He hits great lines, great moments. The scene when he's trying to pour Loki a drink is fantastic. He's putting on the Mark 7 bands. Yeah. He's obviously the best, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I think that's true. I agree. When you think back to which I definitely went into the iconic lines of this movie, which is where one of the movie's strongest suits come from those characters, and Tony does get a lot of those. He also milks out a lot of interesting moments of a lot of other people. Seeing him and Cap interact, he brings out an aggressive side from Cap that we aren't used to seeing. He puts Thor in an interesting place because he is so confident, and Thor's used to being towering above everyone else. And of course, his relationship with Natasha, who they had their relationship start in Iron Man 2, and his budding development of his relationship with Nick Fury and with Bruce Banner are all some of the highlights of the movie. And of course, those webs interchange elsewhere. But having him bring out and sort of be able to ease you into characters that we're not so used to seeing, like Natasha and Bruce and Clint, he definitely pulls a lot of the energy up in this movie. And I think that's why he's one of my favorite characters and why he's the forefront of the MCU. I mean, he's the main character of this whole damn Infinity Saga. But I think it's fitting because, as you're saying, holy fuck, RDJ he's just so good in this.
I think there is maybe a critique to be made towards Tony Stark in this movie and Joss Whedon as the writer of this movie, that he's sort of like a self-insert, like he's the coolest, he's the snarkiest, he always has like the final word, and it's always the coolest thing you can say in that moment, which is very much how this movie is written, and it's a crowd-pleasing way to write a movie. To have characters always trying like one-upping each other with funny little snarky jokes, but at the same time, you do get like the beginning of the Tony Stark character arc. I'm poet and I didn't know it. I can make a rhyme anytime
Whoa.
because you do have that self-sacrifice that Tony sort of cyclically goes through the MCU. He sacrifices himself, then he gets a taste of that, like doing the right thing, and then he goes too far, like he makes Ultron or something of that nature, or he signs on with the Sokovia Accords or something of that nature, and then he has to learn to like reel it back and do a personal sacrifice again rather than trying to take control. And this is really the first time where that starts to happen. This PTSD carries into Iron Man 3 and like sort of makes him create Ultron in Age of Ultron. So those character moments are there on top of just like the bountiful, fantastic lines that RDJ delivers in this. Part of me is like, how much of this was the writing? Maybe RDJ came up with some of these, but these are hingent on RDJ as Tony Stark. Absolutely.
Yes. No, I agree. And again, it speaks to a fundamental fact about how a lot of these movies are made. They are made for the audience. They are written for the audience. They are made, action sequences for Marvel movies are made in computers before the script for the movie is written.
Yeah.
And that at a certain point, that's just a fact you have to understand when you go to watch these movies. So ultimately, I don't read him as much as a self-insert character, but at the same time, I don't really put as much of the same weight on those character development moments because for on a more serious level, I think that's not what the movie at its core is best at, or what's really focusing on. What I remember is the moments when he's butting heads with people or when he's making a joke, and that's I think that is a side effect of making a movie in this way. And so because of that, I don't really care as much because it's just fun to see him. If I'm accepting I'm watching the Avengers, it's just fun to see him be fun and to push up against Cap and know, hey, in a couple movies, that's going to lead to Civil War and things like that. I think it works for me.
Well, I do want to talk about Cap in that sense then. I don't want to like spend a lot of time breaking down each and every one, but I think a lot of the big players we can spend a little time on, and Cap is one of them. We get his continuation from the first Avenger, where he's the man out of time, and he has to like he gets called in for one last mission or whatever, and he puts on that suit that I don't really like. I think it's a little stupid, but even then, there is like an excuse for it in the script, being that Phil Coulson says he had a hand in designing it, and Phil Coulson is a huge Captain America nerd, so of course it would be like bright and body, and I just wish there was a line that Captain America had. He's like, really? This is what I'm wearing? But regardless, I think Steve gets a lot of good stuff. He learns to be a soldier in the modern age, which leads into the Winter Soldier and things of that nature. He's ordering cops around. He's saving civilians. He's putting himself on the line just as much as anybody else is in that battle. And I think that we get an equal amount of good stuff. Tucker, I'm going to steal a line that we both think is great. I'm going to shout it out right here. When they're jumping out to do that Iron Man, Thor, Captain America battle, and Maria Hill, or no, it's Black Widow says, you might want to sit this one out, Cap. That guy's basically a god. And he's like, there's only one god, ma'am. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
And he jumps out of the plane.
Yeah.
Oh my god. That whole sequence is just gold. But I think that really leads into what I'm trying to say about why I think this movie works so well is there's not many sequences that I can think out of this that feel out of place. There's such a coherent tone and consistent quality to the dialogue of this movie that every scene has a character moment, has a memorable line, has a cool action shot that feeds together in this really, I think, engaging experience that I do not feel the well over 2-hour runtime of this movie in the slightest. Like, this is one of the, in my opinion, best paced movies of the MCU because I'm always ready. Okay, this is what's going to happen next. I can't wait to see this sequence. I can't wait to see them do this move or say this line or develop a character in this way. And it's phenomenal, and especially what you're saying with Cap, if him sort of falling back into readjusting to society, but also readjusting to being a leader and having to adapt to people knowing who he is and stuff like that. It's a really interesting place to put the man out of the time in and throw him right into all this nonsense. And I think Chris Evans I liked him a lot in First Avenger, but I think he shines a lot brighter here when he has more interesting characters to bounce off of.
Sure.
I think Cap for me does not work as well. And the main reason is because I just really think that the MCU squanders his return. You get a couple basically bit lines of like, Tony's like, hey, you need to go see which of the fucking power couplings are overheating or whatever. And he's like, It's running off electricity, and that's a good line. It's like, oh, he was from the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, he's got no fucking idea what this means, but it's not materially important, really. And of course, we get some of that later when he meets an old Peggy, and we get moments of this as the MCU progresses. But I just think we miss something by having him be on the ball as quickly as he's on the ball, right?
Sure.
And it contributes to my same problem of, oh, he goes from scrawny Steve Rogers to big bulky Captain America Steve Rogers. You missed that progression. You missed the progression again here. And I just, the way he assumes the de facto leadership so quickly doesn't quite work for me either. I think Cap is the guy that plays off of others well. But I just don't think in the context of Cap himself, he works for me the way he works for other people.
Sure. I feel like we should move on to one of the next big three, the third of the big three, Thor Odinson himself, the demigod, or god, depending on what people say in the script. It doesn't really matter. They use them interchangeably.
Thor leaves the littlest impression on me out of all of the Avengers.
Yeah.
He's just there. He's there because Loki is there, and it's time to have the Asgardian. He doesn't even get any time with Selvig. There's a throwaway line about moving Natalie Portman to the middle of fucking nowhere.
Yeah.
Thor is fun, but he gets the really cool shot of thundering all the fucking Chitauri back through the portal. But other than that, I really think he's the one that's underserved by the movie the most.
I definitely agree. I think this is where my disconnect for the majority of the MCU started with Thor. I mean, I don't care for Thor, the movie. I don't really care too much for Thor in this movie, and I certainly don't in Dark World, which we'll get to. But it really isn't until Ragnarok that I had any connection to his character, because I don't. He's an interesting like bounce pad for the other characters, seeing how they react to interacting with an alien and a god and someone who can do all these fantastical things. But he himself doesn't have a ton of great moments. I think he's actually the one that has the least in terms of starting relationships with the other character, which is a little bit underwhelming, because I mean, I think he could be an interesting character as we see with Ragnarok, but he's pretty underplayed here. Though I think this is where I feel Chris Hemsworth is more obviously more confident in the role. I think he handles his lines better. He carries himself in a more confident way. He does feel like he's portraying this Asgardian presence a lot better. And also his eyebrows are a real human color, which is nice to see. But yeah, he's the one I care for the least, but I don't dislike him. It's just sort of a disconnect, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a lot of the same way. I think he has his share of good moments. One of my favorite lines is, and Chris Hemsworth is a talented comedic actor. One of my favorites is when he says, "You be careful how you talk about Loki. He may be evil, but he's my brother. He's like, he murdered 80 people in 3 days. He's adopted."
Adopted.
But yeah, I agree with you, Tucker. I really don't find myself really buying into Thor as an MCU character until Ragnarok, and even then, really like the end of Ragnarok going into Infinity War.
Yeah.
Thor is my favorite character in all of Infinity War, which we'll get to eventually. We'll get there. Everyone keep your pants on. We'll get there eventually.
Chill the fuck out.
But yeah, I also similarly don't have a lot to say about Thor in this movie. But I feel like we do have quite a bit to say about a fresh new face in this movie, Mr. Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner the Hulk. Fresh off a recasting, we get a good character introduction to him. He's in where does he? Thank you, Tucker. He's in Calcutta. We get that scene between him and Black Widow. That sort of sets up some stuff in Age of Ultron, and those characters are sort of connected through this. And Josh Whedon clearly had a trajectory for those two characters. But what do you fellas think of the Hulk?
I think he's really good.
Yeah.
I think Ed Norton is better than Mark Ruffalo. I think I really find Mark Ruffalo to be a little bit of a wet blanket, basically all of the time. I think that if Ed Norton, who is a very good actor, was put in a stronger movie, we would have gotten a more one-to-one comparison. Sure. I just feel like it's a confluence of factors that makes me feel really ho-hum on Mark Ruffalo. I think kind of for the entire MCU, because ultimately he gets more to do in Age of Ultron, but he's always a side character effectively. And so I think as just a character, not as an actor, he has a great arc. I really like Banner's relationship with Tony. I really like him kind of coming to terms with his suit being the Hulk.
Yeah.
I think that works. But I've just never been a huge Mark Ruffalo fan. I just don't think he brings a lot to the character.
Well, I personally think he brings a lot more to the character than Edward Norton does. Because when you're watching Edward Norton, and a lot of his lines don't feel like they're confidently said, and his relationships with his familiars aren't doing nothing for anybody. When Mark Ruffalo comes in and brings this sort of quiet reserve to the character that feels a lot more consistent and unique as compared to the actiony guy, confident guy that Edward Norton was playing Bruce Banner, I do think that it puts Bruce Banner as a character and Mark Ruffalo as an actor in a much more interesting role. You see him in this movie develop a lot. I mean, he's pushed himself out of society and sort of given himself a quiet place to be. But when he's forcefully reintroduced, he has to deal with, okay, people know I'm the Hulk, but do they care about that, or do they want me for my mind? And then he's using his confidence in his science skills to build relationships with Tony and show that he is a valuable member of the team. And it gives him a lot more moments because the Hulk isn't there from square one to be vulnerable. You get the line about him trying to commit suicide, which you would have seen in the post credits of that first movie, but that didn't happen. And I think it puts him in a really interesting place, and especially when you get such a solid buildup to him finally becoming the Hulk, and that incredibly animated, still holds up well today, transformation sequence. You can see like the fear in his eyes as he's becoming the Hulk for the first time in years, and then a genuine horror sequence of him chasing Natasha through the bowels of the helicarrier, and then what the Hulk becomes for the rest of the movie, and his whole arc with that, I think is amazing. And he's clearly underplayed. I really wish that Mark Ruffalo had gotten more screen time in the entire MCU. I'm very excited to see him show back up with She-Hulk. But in the Hulk being sidelined, this is one of my favorite performances of his, and one of my favorite roles of his in the MCU, because I think he does add a lot. He brings a passion and a heart and a quiet reserve to the Avengers that no one else feels, because they're all these big personalities.
Yeah, I totally agree, Tucker. I think that he does serve that sort of that mild-mannered person on the team, because no one else really is, but he has to be by nature of him, keeping the Hulk hidden for over a year. And just those moments of like where Tony Stark is like poking him with the sharp thing, trying to get him to become the Hulk for some god who knows why reason, just in the middle of that
his own
laboratory.
ass, and he's like, I want to see what happens.
Yeah. But he does great in those moments, because he is underplayed as compared to Robert Downey Jr. and the hulking masses that are Chris Hemsworth and Chris Evans, and like the sly, cool Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. He fills that like the straight man role essentially. He has to be the guy that's sort of underplayed in all these sequences. And even then, we get him when that anger starts to come out, when they have that argument sequence, when he grabs the scepter sort of unknowingly. That's a great
chills thinking about it.
I love that sequence so much, because they're all just throwing barbs at each other, all from every which direction. That's the take off the suit, what are you? Everything special about you came out of a bottle. Thor has
people are tiny and petty. He's the spy. His secrets have secrets.
Yeah. Yes, and even and Mark Ruffalo sort of comes out of nowhere. Like he's scary because he could turn into the Hulk, and he's scary because he unknowingly grabbed the scepter. Who knows what could have happened there? And Mark Ruffalo plays all those moments very, very well.
Yeah, he's a lot more serious than everyone else, and I think that's why I appreciate him the most. He, like everyone who's even throwing one-liners at him, like a Tony or like Natasha, he has this sort of cool sort of confusion about him, because he's so not used to this atmosphere, that he brings a seriousness to situations. Tony will say a snarky line, and they'll be like, that was actually, like, you can see in his eyes, that probably wasn't a good idea, because like this guy does have that power behind him, and like maybe I should calm down. So he brings a piece to the team, which is really interesting.
No, I agree. I just, before we move on again, but I think basically all of this comes down to a much better script for whomever was going to play the Hulk.
Sure.
Right. I just think that my only contention is on an actor to actor level. I think that Ed Norton could have brought that same seriousness to the role. And I think I just think that the recast was, of course, it was necessary from behind the scenes, all the production horse shit that Ed Norton incurs by being Ed Norton. But I think if you wrangled him, he could have brought exactly what you're saying to the role, because it would have been a better written part for him to play.
Sure,
because the Hulk as a
certainly
character
possible.
Is really great. I agree that he is close to, if not the heart of the movie.
Yeah,
just from a writing perspective and the scenes he gets. So,
and now we whittled our way down to who are widely regarded as the worst two Avengers: Natasha and Clint, Black Widow and Hawkeye. Hawkeye gets very little play in this, so I guess we should probably start off with Natasha, with Black Widow, and I think she's sort of unjustly maligned against in this movie. I think
people not like her in this movie.
I mean, this was like the start of the she has guns and Clint has a bow and arrow or whatever. Who cares? They're the worst Avengers. But Scarlett Johansson does a great job in this. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie is when that Loki Black Widow interaction when he's in the cage and he's like he's throwing barbs at her. He's saying that she's nothing. He's all powerful. He can end everyone on the ship, and if he can. And then she like flips that switch when she gets the information that she wanted, because she was playing him the whole time. Yeah. It is a great like spy Natasha moment that we get in this. She's fun in her solo introduction when all those Russian people are.
That's such a good sequence. Oh my god!
It's given me everything.
God!
I'm not giving her
everything. You everything.
No,
Oh,
and she also has some of the most impressive action in this. Because it's devoid of CGI lasers and swinging and lightning and giant Hulk monsters. She's just doing martial arts, or she's not doing martial arts. The stunt actor is, but
I saw some behind the scenes. She does do a good amount of that. She doesn't do the flippity dippity shit, but when she's handling a Chitauri laser whatever and flipping around and like all that stuff, like bounce off the car, that's actually Scarlett Johansson, and it's very impressive.
I think she also pulls off this sort of like, she understands that she's out of her depth in this, and she also like it comes across that like she's keeping a cool head, but underneath she's like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, she's great. I think she's great. I always like Black Widow. I think she was great in Iron Man 2. I think she's great here. She has a wonderful range of moments.
Yeah.
On a character level, on an action level. And the really vulnerable scenes of her like almost having some sort of panic attack after being chased by the Hulk, and then getting back on the comms, being like, I'm here, I'm ready to report. Scarlett Johansson is excellent. I have to say, I think I really do like Clint and Natasha a lot. But the film does them no favors when you're doing that 360 camera pan. You got your God, you got Iron Man charging the repulsor, and then she's got a Beretta. She's reloading the Beretta. It's like, but ultimately, what can you really do? Right. I think she does. She does a great job.
Yeah. Well, the reason I think that Black Widow works for me a lot better in this, while I liked her in Iron Man 2, I think this is where she really starts to come to her own and feel like she's in her element, is that we get a lot of her being a spy, a lot of solo stuff. We didn't see her on her own at all in Iron Man 2. I mean, she was flipping through a hallway, taking out motherfuckers left and right. But in this, she's the one with knowledge. That's the role that she plays. She knows each of these guys because she watched their stories unfold through the eyes of S.H.I.E.L.D. She met each of them, almost all of them individually. She's the one running the Quinjet and commanding the comms. And while she's out of her place in terms of power level, she's certainly not in terms of knowledge and in terms of connection to everyone else. I mean, she's the one that has the most relationships branching off to each of the characters, and I think that puts her in a really interesting position. And you're right about her range. I mean, I think she's the one put in the most diverse amount of sequences where you get out of her as a character and as an actress, the widest range of interesting things. But Clint, on the other hand, I got to go on a little spiel. All right. Hawkeye was my favorite superhero when I was a kid, and it is squarely because of Marvel Studios' The Avengers. Not because the character has done any favors in this film or has the good amount of screen time or is developed as a character, because I just thought using the bow and arrow was awesome. I dressed up as Hawkeye for Halloween when I was 12, and I would always be pretending to be Hawkeye on the playground and stuff. But admittedly so, I listened to the commentary track. He got the short end of the stick in this movie. There was a script of this film where he was a part of the team from the beginning, and he's a core amount of development with the other characters and a character arc that led into future projects. But considering how much they're balancing here and how many other side characters we haven't even gotten to that are involved in this film in larger ways, someone had to get collateral damaged here. And unfortunately, that all lands on Clint. I think that leads to the rest of them feeling like they got solid amounts of screen time and develops roles. But when Clint is sidelined as being possessed, he doesn't get a chance to have interactions, personality, development until the very end. And I do think he does a good job speeding back up to catch up to that at the end. But for so much of the screen time, like, man, I wish Hawkeye was here for the rest of this.
I think that I agree.
Yeah.
So I think Clint's fun. I think he's really fun. I think his marksmanship is great. His relationship with Natasha
is the
great.
world's best archer. So.
Yes, it is great in archery. That is true. But I think he fills his role well in the sense that this movie fills every role of he's got fun, crowd-pleasing moments. He does cool things. That is Clint. The problem with that, and this goes back to where I think the plot is at its absolute weakest, is that Clint kills a lot of S.H.I.E.L.D. members and then reintegrates to the Avengers, and then nobody cares. None of that is unpacked. You get like a half of a scene of Clint and Natasha together as he's waking back up. He's like, man, I kind of feel bad because I killed a lot of people that I serve alongside. I think I should go fly a Quinjet now. And that's what you get. And then Cap doesn't give a fuck. Nobody else acknowledges it. This is where the movie is caring the least about its characters and its plot. And that's really disappointing to me because it comes back to theme. It comes back to having a little bit more to say and a little bit more to unpack and a little bit more to develop in a serious way, not just in a comic booky, let's set up some duos and later plot threads type of way. So I think Clint is emblematic of where I feel like the movie falters the hardest.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, by nature of what his role became in this movie, I think it's fine if you don't really care for Clint Barton, because a lot of his character development does get sort of shuffled over to Avengers 2 and maybe the Hawkeye series, which we'll be reviewing on this channel. You know, we'll do our MCU show breakdown, but I think we did it. We spent a lot of time, but I think it was well deserved talking about each and every one of these characters.
The one thing I do want to add on top of this is that we talked about all of the core, the 06 Avengers, the original 6. That's this geek term for it. But one other thing that I think this movie does really well is giving more significant supporting roles to the S.H.I.E.L.D. members. Coulson and Fury have their largest roles ever here, and both of them do amazing. I mean, it's so natural how they integrate with the rest of these really big, powerful characters. But again, like Natasha, they're the ones with knowledge. They're the ones who understand how to keep a team together, how to develop, their relationships and keep everything under wraps. And I love both of them so much in this film. And I think obviously Coulson's best role. I mean, kind of difficult to give him anything else afterwards. But I really like how they are able to not only have such a large cast of core characters, but have really good supporting characters as well.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, Tucker. I mean, we get such great S.H.I.E.L.D. characters. You know, we get Nick Fury, we get Maria Hill, we get Phil Coulson, we get Galaga Guy. Who could forget all these classic S.H.I.E.L.D. characters?
Agent Sitwell.
Oh, that's right, Sitwell's in it. Sorry, Abram, I had to throw that joke in.
The Galaga Guy, I think, is also emblematic of how the humor lands like 85% of the time.
Yeah.
But then the last 15% is like, oh, well, you didn't really have to make 2 Galaga jokes. That didn't have to become a bit. But ultimately, that's small potatoes. And when a script with this as good as this one is in terms of character and dialogue. But Fury, I think I'm also frustrated by. I think Nick Fury is really good. I think Samuel L. Jackson, as usual, is great. But I think he again links into my problem of the film being kind of hollow on a plot level, because he basically gives the finger to the board above him, the administration,
the shadowy face world leaders,
and also he tries to pull the wool over the Avengers' eyes. He says "fuck you" to the world government, but none of that matters. He lies to the Avengers about Coulson's cards being, and he like covered the cards in Coulson's.
I like to imagine that he did go up to Coulson's body, and like Tucker said, he used the cards and like getting dipped with a chip, like a Totino's chip. He just scooped up some blood. He's like, all right, good enough.
Yeah, and that's such that is so interesting, but it doesn't matter, and it just comes back to the same problem I have of an important or a more mature thematic idea and us steering directly around it and going forward. It just doesn't work for me.
The one thing I would say actually is, and I had a conversation with this as we were watching the film, is this is one of the Coulson's death is one of the few moments of the MCU where they do take time to breathe. they treat it with reverence. The characters have multiple scenes of them sitting like, fuck, like we've been batting heads the whole time, not working together, not listening to one another, not trusting one another. And this is what it gets us. Like this guy that we, didn't really know, but, felt a connection with has paid the price. And each of them has a moment with that. And Fury manipulating them and using his, extra level 4D chess knowledge to sort of plant the seed in the Avengers' minds that, no, this is an even bigger consequence. The cards are emblematic of not only Fury's knowledge, but the ways that the characters are connected. Because when you think of the fact that Coulson is such a big fan of superheroes in general, and he's the nerd around, he's like, oh yeah, I get to meet Thor and Tony Stark, and this is all going crazy. And the cards being like the main element of that, then that's established earlier on, brought back in a couple smaller ways, and then paid off in a really powerful emotional moment. It makes this film that is crazy and bombastic and quips all the time have a 10-15 minute chunk in the middle where the character's like, fuck, we really do need to work together. Like this needs to be taken more seriously because these stakes are high. And I think it really works for me, especially when you consider a lot of the later MCU moments that are undercut by jokes. This one doesn't have that.
Yeah, I mean, I said this when we were, like Tucker said, we were talking about this. I'm like, yeah, it's sort of a low bar that we like for a solid 10 minutes after something serious happens, no one makes a joke. Isn't that crazy? But yeah, it's a low bar, but it is an important thing the MCU can be criticized on as a whole.
No, I agree. The death of Coulson is handled very well. I'm a big Coulson fan. Again, as I said, I'm a self-hating Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fan. And I think he does a great job here. But I just feel like if we follow this idea to its conclusion, we hit a brick wall because Coulson's death means a lot to the Avengers. It shakes them fundamentally.
Yeah.
Phil gets brought up to Loki later on by Iron Man. He's like, "You killed Phil." Or it's not as direct as that, but he is mentioned. He is important.
There's one more guy you pissed off. His name was Phil.
Yeah.
Nick Fury lied and manipulated his death to force the Avengers to work in Nick Fury's favor. That is a humongous betrayal and a humongous character moment that never gets dealt with.
No,
because if you want to talk about this team is tenuous and they're coming together, it would split them apart and then rebuild them stronger, or would lead to a really interesting plot moment. The realization that all this happened kind of under a pretense.
Yeah,
but it doesn't accomplish anything.
Here's the thing. I agree with that in part, but I think when you really take a look at what Nick Fury did to manipulate them is say that these cards, which are just emblematic of Phil's, sort of unique sense of personality, being a fanboy, quote unquote, were on him at all times. And saying that they were on him when he died isn't like he did die. That right. Part, well, he died, but that part isn't what Nick Fury is hiding. He's not manipulating his death in sort of a evil way. He's using this element to sort of bring out Phil's passion and remind them that this is someone you cared about, and these are the stakes. And I honestly don't think, if you even think about what would have happened if they had found out, or if they ever did find out, of course, it's not something we ever know. I don't think it's really as important of a moment, or important in terms of Fury's manipulation in a dark way. I don't think they would have reacted negatively, because they would have realized in that moment that this is either Fury make this little manipulation or the end of New York City. I think that the scale balance there mostly just shows Nick Fury's willingness to make that sort of, his friend is dead, but sacrifice their friendship, I guess, to achieve the greater good. And I think that it makes that moment even more powerful when you consider where the trust has lied, and this one final small lie really bringing them together.
I know, I see where you're coming from for sure. I just think it's a matter of tightness, because ultimately you could have had this play it the same way, but Nick just got the cards out of the locker and said, look, he brought these onto the helicarrier. These were in his locker. These were sacred to him. This is what you meant to this man. And then you completely get rid of this whole dangling thread that for me feels like it's dangling because it would have been too complex to try to address. I just think you can still use the cards in a way that doesn't open a door that we're not willing to walk through. That's more my thing.
All right, folks, we've spent a long time talking about the deep, complex, looking at character motivations, critiquing this film on a filmic level. But that's not what this film is made for. We've said it multiple times. This film is made for its cool moments. And I didn't want to make this video an entire like, oh, wasn't this cool? Wasn't this awesome, man? That was so funny. And I'm glad that we didn't. I'm glad that we didn't. But I think it's time that we spend a little teensy bit of time on that. So I just want to go around and everyone say, what is your favorite part of the fantastic moment to moment film that is the Avengers? What is your favorite coolest moment? I can start.
Think.
I can start.
Give me a second.
I think that it's a hard pick. It's a hard pick.
He had one, but you can, Tanner.
Yeah.
I don't mean to take this rug out from underneath you, but you are allowed to say multiple. As I decree here, you're allowed to mention multiple.
Oh my god. I think one of the. I mean, we shouted out the helicarrier scene where they're all talking to each other. But I want to say the helicarrier fight is just all around cool, but particularly the Hulk v Thor thing, just because it's these characters that, you know, Thor's part of the big thing, but Hulk really isn't. But and their sort of rivalry goes all the way into Thor Ragnarok. But I just love when like they're swinging each other around and Hulk's trying to pick up the hammer, but his feet are cracking the concrete below him and stuff like that. It's just all cool moments like that. I don't want to steal anybody else's, but I'm gonna roll right immediately into the next one. The fight in the woods is also fantastic. Doth Mother know you weareth her drapes? There's just all these fight scenes are chock full of lines like that, and then of course you get the Thor striking Captain America's shield, and we get like an oh shit moment. Captain America's shield can take a blow from Thor's hammer. That's crazy. What? And then the thing where Thor hits Tony with a bolt of lightning, it's like, suit capacity at 400%. He's like, well, how about that? Good stuff. Great stuff.
This is really a fucked up question to ask, because the reason this movie works is because you can pick a cool, badass moment from every single scene in the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so because of that, just to name a couple, I agree. I think the entire helicarrier sequence is just maybe one of the best action set pieces in any comic book movie, period.
Mm-hmm.
I really do love that.
Yeah.
In terms of really small moments, the suiting up midair after being thrown out of Stark Tower is maybe one of the coolest, not the coolest suit up for Iron Man.
We were talking about that. It's like,
that.
we had a suit in a suitcase, or like a briefcase.
Mm-hmm.
How can we do it? We'll have it attach itself to him. Oh, while he's falling. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I love that moment.
A suit torpedo.
Yeah. I think for me, when I really break down why I love this movie, I come out from a different angle. Yes, I think this has some of the best, most consistent action sequences in the entire series. But it really is the character moments for me that make this movie work, and why it's a 10 out of 10 for me. So moments from this film that I remember are the character interactions, and is one of my favorite moments in all of film history is that argument in the lab on the helicarrier.
Yeah.
Is them really each bringing out each other's personalities and showing the tension build to that natural moment where Loki escapes and Banner's holding the scepter. That leads into, as Abram was saying, the whole helicarrier thing. I think not just the Thor and Hulk fight, but the fact that everyone has a role in that sequence. No one gets left out. Hawkeye's finally introduced. Natasha has multiple roles to fill. Tony and Cap are doing something very important, keeping them there. They're falling out of the air. Maria Hill's popping headshots left and right. There's so much shit going on in that scene, but it feels really easy to follow, cohesive, and no one is left out. And I think that's why, as a sequence, the moment that they are on the helicarrier to when, the team is essentially disbanded and Hulk is thrown down into that warehouse and Thor has that crazy sequence where he has to break into the thing and smash into the ground. That's just nonstop everything. Action, character moments, memorable moments in terms of iconic shots, and man, it just works so well for me. And the Battle of New York is where this movie leans most heavily into its fan service, but it's at a moment where I think a lot like Endgame, it feels earned. Yeah. These characters have worked together for so long, or not worked together, but are now starting to work together, that having these moments of them wombo comboing across the streets of New York just looks awesome. And the cinematography is amazing. You get one shots of following everyone all the way up to Hawkeye shooting the arrow and stuff. It's just breathtaking stuff.
Yeah. I was going to mention, another common critique of the MCU and modern action as a whole is the over-edited style of action sequences, and that just doesn't really happen in the Avengers from memory. It's so good that maybe I just forgot that
from
it
memory
does
as
happen.
of 2 days ago.
Exactly. But one moment that no one brought up that I was really wishing they did, so I could talk about the Avengers score is that's my secret cap. I'm
Oh
always
my
angry.
fucking god! And the fact that they save the full Avengers theme hit
Yeah.
for that moment as his fist hits the Leviathan and he finishes his transformation, that is that's chills right there.
Alan Silvestri made the ass poppinest goddamn theme
Oh my
that he
fucking
possibly
God.
could for this movie, and you know what? More power to him. Thank
It's
you,
so good.
thank you, Alan.
The theming of that theme throughout this film is just exquisite. The fact that it has so many elements, there's the slow string build at the beginning that they're able to use as the film's opening, and then you have the horns hitting and the like rhythmic section that are used in different sections, but all combined at the end. And with that fist hit and then the spin around shot, it flows so naturally together, and it's so powerful.
Yeah. Okay.
Abram's got something to say.
Abram has something to say? Sorry.
Because I have one more fundamental issue with this movie I need to talk about.
Okay, fine.
And it relates
go.
to the action.
Okay.
And the cinematography.
Oh, okay.
I think this movie is a really mixed bag visually and auditorially.
Audibly.
Something.
This video brought to you by Audible.
I think the sound design for this movie is not especially good. I think it fluctuates in quality. There's some stuff that sounds excellent, but guns sound very poor, and I think a lot of explosions and effects feel kind of flat. They feel like you're throwing bags of flour. So there's a thud and there's an impact, but it doesn't feel weighty enough. The movie doesn't feel very crunchy to me. There's some moments where the action really hits, but a lot of it doesn't feel particularly impactful to me.
Yeah.
And that is a big negative in the film, in my perspective, when Maria and Nick are popping shots, but it doesn't really sound like they are. That takes me out of the experience. When we're in New York and everything's fucking going crazy and buildings are being destroyed, and the big Chitauri whale man hits a building and he just kind of like thuds into it. It just doesn't quite work for me. I think the CGI is quite good. The effects are quite good, but they don't sound that good to me. And I think the cinematography is only there about half of the time. I think some of the action is really great. I think some of the shots are really great. But I think there's a lot of action that gets masked under really fast camera movement in a way that makes things disorienting. And I think that a lot of shots end up just feeling emptily, like framed in an empty way or in a very flat way. There's very little depth to the film visually, which is a style, and it's this sort of matte Marvel look we come to expect. But as I'm going to talk about in my closing statement, this is the same year as Skyfall. And when I look at what other big blockbuster films are doing, I just don't think that Avengers 1 from a technical level was where I think the later Avengers films came to be. Some of them are a real clusterfuck, as we're going to get to. But I think that the technical elements, the sound of a Marvel movie, the look of a Marvel movie has progressed past this. This does feel a little bit flat and sound a little bit flat to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up Skyfall, and I just had to double check really quick. Skyfall was done by Daddy Roger Deakins, so when
you got Daddy Deakins on the horn, ain't nothing going wrong.
But you can pay for a Daddy Deakins if you're making.
I guess that's fair. But he was working on Skyfall.
He's not the only cinematographer, as much as a 15-year-old Abram liked to think that was true.
Hold on, wait a second.
Yes.
I think there is sort of like a distinct visual style in the Avengers that isn't in a lot of MCU. I think, you said that this is where it sort of begins. I disagree. I think this looks quite a bit different than a lot of other MCU things, and I can't really place my finger on it. I can't use specifics to refute that, but I think it is like the camera movements, the glossiness that that everything in the film has, especially those special effects. And I think you may have a point about like the flatness of shot construction and things like that. But I think it is just like the Avengers style is what this movie looks like, right. And it didn't really happen before, and it didn't really happen after with even other Avengers movies.
Sure.
But
boys, we did it. We talked about the fucking Avengers.
We talked about the Avengers for quite a long time. But no, Abram, you said you had a closing statement. I don't really have a closing statement. Tucker, would you like to make one as well?
I think we should. I think I should go first because mine's more negative, and I think we should end a triumphant review for a triumphant movie on a more uplifting note than what I'm about to say.
Okay, sure, go for it.
I like this movie. I do like the Avengers. But I look around and I just find myself seeing a lot of missed opportunities here. Amazing character moments, some great interactions. But when I'm looking at Skyfall, when I'm looking at the MCU stuff before it, that felt like it was a little more hearty. I just can't help but feel like there's a lot of missed thematic and plot opportunity here. Marvel is the top of the box office. It is the top of the industry. I don't care what anybody says. Love MCU, hate MCU. MCU is dictating Hollywood now. It has been since this point, and that's undeniable. But I just think that in spite of that, there are fundamental things about this style of filmmaking that serves an audience, that serves the comic book moments, that doesn't quite serve me. And I want a little bit more hardiness out of my films, and my favorite Marvel movies give me that. And for me, the character stuff is great. The sort of fun development is great, but I just think that I'm losing a little bit of substance in the Avengers.
Tucker.
This is something I've thought about for a long time.
Okay.
I'm a Marvel fan, believe it or fucking not.
What?
And this single piece of media may be the most important thing that I ever watched in my life in terms of developing me as a person, in my interests, in my career choices, all of that. I'm a film fan because of the Avengers. When I watch this film, it reminds me why I love cinema, I don't fuck you, Martin Scorsese, suck my wiggly dick. This is cinema to me. This is what movies can do. And I've seen this movie probably over 20 times in my life. And every time I still feel like I'm getting something new out of it. I feel like I'm understanding the characters better, noticing plot progression better. I feel more in tune with the line delivery and the character relationships, and everything in this movie just feels like it funnels to a point that hits exactly on what films should be, in my opinion. This is what movies can do. It is for the audience, and I think that is important. I think that it's entertainment at its finest, but with just craft behind it. It's got style, it's got character, it's got interaction, it's got personality oozing out of every fucking orifice. And when I watch this film, it reinvigorates me to be the film fan, the superhero fan, and the human being that I am today. It gave Hawkeye the short end of the stick, and I will certainly negate it for that. And I think the other is an underwhelming addition to whatever the fuck his addition is to this cast. But those points are like 4% out of what otherwise is a movie that hits on 12 cylinders at all times. It goes. The pacing is phenomenal. The action and writing and acting and chemistry is just going all of the time. And when I mean, it's unfortunately almost all downhill from here. Because when I think about my favorite movie, it's Avengers Endgame, a couple more, and this. I like Endgame more because of what it did for me personally and emotionally, concluding the journey. But I think this is a better movie because it feels more tightly crafted. And that's something I don't say very often, comparing my things to my favorite movie of all time. But this is to get our ranking started now, a 10 out of 10, 100%. Okay.
All right.
What what is the 10 out of 10 score for, if not to give it to one of the best crafted movies in the history of cinema?
That's fair. That's completely fair. And as Tucker alluded to, of course, it is finally time, after following our epic discussion, and what felt like to me sometimes like I was moderating an Avengers debate between these two fellas. It's time to reveal our final scores. So if everyone would pretty please, get that fancy little ranking pulled up, our state-of-the-art Google form. Everyone get ready to type your numbers in. Are you ready?
We're ready. 3,
I'm ready.
2, 1, go.
Okay. Would you look at that? Okay. So Tucker said it a few times, so I'll just say his score up top. Tucker gave this a 10 out of 10. I gave it an 8.7, and Abrams coming in at the lowest, as predicted and presumed, at a 6.8. As per usual as well.
I was the highest on Hulk by more than double your two scores.
Hey, good for you, buddy. I'm sure that'll reflect nicely with the audience. But of course, that averages out to an 8.5. That places it squarely at second place, second to Iron Man at an 8.6. Still close. Maybe if I just bumped my score up a little tiny bit more, but
that's not the universe we live in.
That's not the universe we live in.
A Tanner variant that gave us 8.7.
I've looked into the future, and there's only one universe where
this film came out on top, and it's the one where I moved it up only 0.1 decimal points.
But there are no universes where Abram enjoys this film more. There are infinite parallel universes, but none of them have Abram liking this movie more.
That's a Nectus event or whatever it's
exactly.
called. Yeah.
An absolute point.
It's an absolute point in time. Is Abram thinking that Avengers is mid.
Oh my god.
Oh boy. Okay, well, there you have it. Avengers goes at second place in our ranking.
Avengers.
The Avengers goes at second place, or Avengers Assemble if you're friends from across the pond.
That's fucking wild.
Yeah.
When I
That's what
found
it's
that out,
called?
it's called Avengers Assemble
Because
in Britain.
back in the 90s or whatever, there was some movie called The Avengers already.
Yeah.
That was like it was like Mission Impossible but Britain or whatever.
That's James Bond.
Yeah. Oh,
That's a great point.
oh. We brought up James Bond a weirdly high number of times in this Avengers review.
I'm
But
thinking about James Bond.
that's true. We just saw No Time to Die. But regardless, capping off Phase 1, Avengers at second place. We did it. Okay. And you know what? I simply cannot wait to break into Phase 2 with Iron
Yeah.
Man 3 next time. Wait, what's going on?
Pizza
Whoa,
time.
whoa,
They love me.
what's going on here? Where are we? What's going on? What's happening? Is everyone okay? What's going on? Where are we? Boys, I'm afraid that we've been sucked into the Spider-Verse. It's almost as if there's no way home. Unless, of course, that is, we watch the Raimi trilogy, the Mark Webb duology, and both Spider-Man MCU films before we can return to our MCU quest. That's right, folks. In preparation for Spider-Man No Way Home, we are doing, again, for the first time, we're breaking new ground here, ranking
Yes.
and reviewing every single live-action Spider-Man movie. Like I said, Raimi
Not
trilogy.
Venom, though.
Not Venom. Not Venom. We already did our Venom the Theory Carnage review. But we are doing the Raimi trilogy, the Webb duology, and both Tom Holland MCU films. Folks, I'm super excited. I have actually never seen the Amazing Spider-Man movies, so I'm excited to watch those for the first time. But I'm very excited to go on this little tangent, this little Marvel tangent excursion with you boys. How are you excited?
Yeah.
Not really.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm glad we kept off.
I don't like any of the Spider-Man movies that aren't the MCU ones.
Wow, that's a
You don't
big
like
call.
The Raimi ones?
No.
I haven't seen the Raimi one since I was probably 7, so really I don't.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We'll see.
We shall see. We will be making a separate ranking for the Spider-Man movies, and we'll be placing the Tom Holland ones into our MCU ranking. We'll be doing them a bit out of order, but you know what? Crucify us, why don't ya? Don't actually, please. Please don't do that. We're very sorry.
Please don't come to our house and hang us up on crosses with nails to our hands. That would
Yes.
be an unfortunate circumstance for us, because we might actually finish our MCU ranked at that point.
Yeah. Who's to say?
The only downside to us being crucified.
But folks, yes, from here on out, for the next handful of weeks, we'll be doing a Spider-Man bonanza into the Spider-Verse.
Spider-Nanza.
A Spider-Nanza, as some are calling it.
By handful of weeks, I mean the remainder of 2021.
The remainder of 2021, we'll be doing them week by week in preparation for No Way Home. You get it. You get the idea. Folks, thank you so much for watching this epic review of the Avengers. And we'll see you next time, all the way back in 2002. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Untitled Marvel, the Project.
That's not the name of the show.
Oh, shit, you're right.